Hello, friends, and welcome to the March 29th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about public policy issues here in the great state of Texas and have a conversation about how you can engage in that process. My name is Scott Adnip, your host and Texas Impact's Engagement Director, and today's episode is brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas, Friendship West Baptist Church of Dallas, and my dogs that are barking in the backyard that I will handle momentarily. So I want to start out today with a couple of quick announcements. Since we are talking about immigration today, and since so many of you have been asking, we will be relaunching Texas Impact's Courts and Ports program very soon. We had two staff in the Rio Grande Valley last week meeting with key stakeholders, and so watch for that announcement soon in the e-news, on the Texas Impact website, and via social media. We're also this week launching 3 very important sign-on letters on key issues that we've been talking about during these weekly witness conversations. We'll have one supporting the George Floyd Act, another talking about voting rights, and a third on Medicaid expansion. So I hope that you'll go to texasimpact.org, click on the Action Center, sign those, and make sure that you're sharing them with your friends and amplifying Texas Impact social media posts when those are released via social media. Today, we are going to be focusing on the continuing immigration crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border, talking with Mike Seifert with the ACLU of Texas. Following Mike will be our conversation with Josh Houston about our legislative update and action alert for the week. And we are in the heat of the legislative session now, so we hope that you're watching for those action alerts every Monday at texasimpact.org in the Action Center. But before all of that, I am excited to welcome to the conversation a leader that many in the Texas Impact community are very familiar with, the Texas Impact Board's past president, Dr. Whit Bodman, for this week's Weekly Word. He is an institution at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary and a veteran of many of our Texas Impact Courts and Ports trips. And for those reasons, I'm really looking forward to this week's Weekly Word. So, Dr. Bodman, the floor is now yours.
Thank you. For Christians, this is Holy Week. We are now between Palm Sunday, the celebrated entry of Jesus into Jerusalem, the events of his arrest and trial and crucifixion. For Jews, this is the week of Passover, a time to remember the escape from slavery in Egypt through the miraculously divided Red Sea and into the wilderness of Sinai. For Hindus, this is Holi, the festival of color, a celebration of the love between Krishna and Radha. If you visit a Hindu temple, be sure to wear old clothes because you may be doused with colored chalk. But back to Palm Sunday. In the Gospel of Luke, we hear that when Jesus came up over the top of the Mount of Olives, he saw the city of Jerusalem laid out before him, and he wept, and he said, "Would that even today you knew the things that make for peace, but now they are hid from your eyes. Would that even today we knew the things that make for peace, even today, the year of our Lord, 2021, they are hid from us." So here we meet every week to plan our strategy for the coming days, to influence legislation, to advocate for and advocate against, to try our best to make Texas a better place to live for all. We know some stuff. We know something about racism and the need to change police procedures. We know something about election fraud or the lack of it. We know something about migrants at the border, how they come and why and what they need, and we're about to know a good bit more. We listen every week to smart people telling us about budgets and climate and Medicaid expansion, and then we hear about the legislative challenges to make the right things happen. We learn a lot. We come to know a lot, but we also don't know much, which leaves us in the seemingly awkward position of advocating with energy and conviction and confidence for what we believe in, but at the same time knowing that the full panorama of what's going on, what's happening, is hidden from us. There has been much commentary about how much the current state of media silos our sources of information. We tend to be exposed only to those ideas that most accord to the convictions we already have. Facebook and Instagram and even Google present us with material based on what we have already accessed, so that we do not stray into truly new terrain. Speeding down the information highway, we miss most of what is around us, which makes us strangely parochial, even as we feel that the quantity of information we access is overwhelming. We do not know all the things that make for peace, but we can know the next step, the right and the wrong immediately before us, and that step we can see with conscientious clarity. So here we are today, girding our loins for the contest. Much is hid, but a few things right in front of us are crystal clear. So let's get on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Whit. Really appreciate those words for me anyway to start this Holy Week. That was a good reminder of the work that we have in front of us. So thank you so much for your time and for your continued work. Next, I'd like to welcome to the conversation Mike Seifert, who is a former Roman Catholic priest who now serves as the border advocacy strategist for the ACLU of Texas, working out of the Brownsville office. I've had a chance to get to know Mike over the course of the last couple of years as an incredible advocate, a wonderful teacher, and just an all-around good human being. And so we've had a chance to get to know each other through the Courts and Ports program. And so I know many of you who are watching live, many of you who are listening later have also had a chance to get to know Mike, as he's provided training to hundreds and hundreds of Texans of faith who have served as court observers, met with migrant families, and experienced the crisis at the border firsthand. And we mentioned at the top that we look forward to relaunching that program soon, now that folks are starting to get vaccinated, because Mike, there's still a need at the border, right? The crisis is not yet over. And so that is, first of all, Mike, thanks for joining us.
It's always good to be with you guys. It's a privilege and an honor, and thank you. A great way to start a Monday or start a week, and Holy Week.
Right.
Yeah, so things are, there's crises and there's crises. I heard someone define a crisis on the border is when the government decides to separate children from their families, and not well. So we still don't know where, I think fully a third of those children are. Or now where you have U.S. senators riding in a Border Patrol boat with 50 caliber machine guns, researching the crisis of how do we take care of children. It's a very strange moment we're in. But yeah, we're in it. I think the response from one government to the next is startling on this. For the past 4 years, it's been very, very, very hard to understand anything, to get any kind of access to those in charge for pleading for humanitarian treatment, again, of families and children who are legally here, legally pursuing claims to asylum in a process that in the United States is very complicated, very strict. It's not a come on, come all at all, by no means. And so now we're in a moment where there is a lot of kids coming in, and there's a lot of issues that we as advocates still have with the present government. But I think also, just to move on to the questions, it is certainly a time for the voice of the church. I think more so than in the past 4 years, for sure. And speaking on behalf of so many of these folks that none of us are ever going to really get to meet, a depth of gratitude towards faith leaders and people leaning on the witness offered us by Jesus.
So let's jump into it. I think there were some people who, thought maybe an election would fix things, but this is an issue that we as a country have been grappling with for decades now, and there's still certainly work to do. And it's, the news over the course of the last few weeks has started to refocus attention on what's happening at the border. What's the current reality at the border, and is this an unprecedented situation?
One, no, it's not. It's not unprecedented. And I think we'll put in a chat or someplace a really fine article done by the Washington office on Latin America that just lays out with data what's going on at this moment. One, we need to remember always what happened in Central America over this past year and a half, and 2 hurricanes, a pandemic poorly handled, famine, and just the ongoing, persistent, extraordinarily hard to grasp violence. So if you're a parent being responsible for your children, in many cases, your moral obligation is to get out of town, and people will go where they have family members. That could be Costa Rica, that could be Mexico, and in many cases, it's the United States. So the migration continues. It's not extraordinary. What's different is that the numbers are hard, perhaps, to follow if you're not into the weeds. A year ago, the President Trump pressured the Center for Disease Control to issue a Title 42 order, which is it's an obscure thing that's not been used like this. I have to research, but I'm pretty sure it came out during the yellow fever pandemic. It's basically gives the government the right to shut the border in the case of a plague. And so the president asked CDC to check that out. They came back and said, well, actually, there's no good evidence that migrants bring COVID. That's just not the case. But they were pressured to do that in any case. And so Title 42 remains in place. And what that means in reality, if I'm from Guatemala and I have my 9-year-old with me and I cross the river at Matamoros, I surrender to a Border Patrol agent. They, from what I've seen, they take my fingerprints. I don't know if they fingerprint the kid. That's it. And they put us back on the bridge back into Mexico. And so then I will try again because I don't want to be in Mexico. That's not where I'm going. And so what the Border Patrol is seeing are lots and lots of apprehensions, but they're not unique encounters. It's the same people. The second thing is that, and the oddness in all of this, the state of Tamaulipas, which is the state that borders Brownsville, McAllen, and Laredo, refuses to take families that have children 6 years or under. They will receive from the United States families who are expelled with kids 7 years or older. But the state of Chihuahua will take them all. So what's happened, this is how strange things are. Border Patrol will pick up a family has 6-year-olds or younger, and then they fly them to El Paso, where then they expel them into Ciudad Juarez. It's very strange. It's not helpful. It often ends up separating families who may still be in the state of Tamaulipas. So it's just all this back and forth going on. But there is a typically expected rise in migration going on right now. And what we're seeing that's different than the past 4 years is the response by the government. So as advocates, we're asked to lean in. And I think the question we're trying to answer is how do we take care of people rather than how do we scare them off? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's certainly a different philosophy. What are you most concerned about right now?
Well, I think we've discovered that children are being held for more. They're only allowed to be held for 72 hours. And there's some that have been held. Someone reported the other day a family with a young child who were held for 10 days in Border Patrol processing. So that's beyond the pale. Those are 10 days where they don't have access to an attorney, and who knows what else is going on in there. But again, different from a year ago, there are Department of Health and Human Services involved, FEMA's involved. And so it's a question of getting shelters up and getting kids out as quickly as possible. And so there are many advocates working with the White House itself on this. It's a politically charged issue, obviously. My dad called me from Alabama wondering if I was okay. And I thought, why are you worried about that? He said, well, the news shows us being overrun. I was like, one, we're not being overrun. And secondly, they're 6-year-olds. I'm not really worried, to be honest with you. But that's the message that's out there. So the Biden administration has to figure out how to navigate that at the same time leaning into a different change. The bottom line is that we need comprehensive immigration reform. We've been asking for that, all of us, for 25 years. It still hasn't come. This is the moment to move into that.
And Mike, I will say I'm coaching my son's soccer team, and it's a team full of 4 and 5-year-olds. So, well, I think you could probably, take them if you needed to. I will say that having them all come at me would maybe give me some pause. But so one of the things that I find unique about our listenership and Texas Impact members is they're always wanting to get beyond kind of the sensationalism of the news to figure out what we actually need to do. And so as we're meeting with our members of Congress, as we're trying to address some of this federal policy, what should we be watching for, and what do you think that ask should be?
Well, I think on a state level, since the Texas state legislature's in session, there's a couple of things going on. Governor Abbott sent a whole bunch of state troopers to the border, again, because responding to a so-called emergency or a crisis or whatever terminology they were using at the time. One, we don't need more of those kinds of boots on the ground. According to the Border Patrol's own statistics in the Rio Grande Valley, the average agent in a month apprehends 5 people. That's 5 people. We have enough boots on the ground. What are missing is responses in a moment of COVID, the whole challenge around the energy grid. So one, I think, we've got a bunch of really smart people listening to this. They can see through all of that. One thing we don't need is boots on the ground. One thing that we are pressuring the legislature to do is peel away some of the monies from the DPS border operations and use those for instance, Senator Lucio's border medical initiatives that he's got. So there's things out there, some alternatives to that. So one, statewide, yeah, we're fine. We don't need any state troops here. We've got enough federal troops as is going on. And then at the congressional level, I think it's the same message, is that, hey, we're faith people. We've got big hearts with big institutions. We can take care of this. And I think keeping that message up there, I think avoiding we do this well, but it's a reminder to each other, avoid all this language about surges and overrun and so on and so forth. And notice again that they're children. So I think that's it. We'll continue. I will say this, our congressional leaders who are sympathetic to our views do need to hear from us, help them keep their backbone, because it's a challenging moment. It's the red meat that many Republicans ran on the last time. And so it's a challenge to keep our folks faithful.
I want to make sure I heard you correctly. So each agent is apprehending 5 people per month?
On average, yeah. Yeah. And some of those 5 will be the same one that I saw a week ago because of Title 42.
All right. So you mentioned comprehensive immigration reform earlier. Any hope for that, or?
We'll see how this will be the challenge for the Biden administration, is how they navigate this initial confusion, I would call it, by the media and again by people who are not part of his party. And will the Democrats really step up and weigh in on their campaign promises? It's going to be tough, but it's also just so patently obvious the need for that kind of reform. It could well be a moment for that. Yeah, we'll see. I choose to feel hopeful. Again, I think because I go to church.
It is the season for hope, maybe. So I know we've also been hearing about the overcrowding in facilities and the possibility of sending some of these kids off to other parts of the state, other parts of the country. Any insight on that, or any thoughts to share?
Again, I think it's very important for our congressional representatives to hear from us that we are quite concerned about the welfare of the kids. They need to be out of those places as quickly as possible, clearly into a safe place. I think it was about 10 years ago, a piece of legislation passed Washington, making that stay in the Office of Refugee Resettlement Facilities go from a couple of days to a couple of weeks and a month, so that the agency could check where the kids were being released to. So if a kid comes in, he's 9 years old, and he's going to an uncle in Maryland, they need a couple of weeks to be sure that there is an uncle, that it's in Maryland, and that the address is still good. So we're not just sending a kid out on the street. So there's a certain responsible pacing for it. At the same time, under the previous administration, family members were told that they would all be screened, and there's often mixed status families, and so people were afraid to come forward, and that slowed the process down. And the last thing those kids need to be is in those places for longer than absolutely necessary. So on their behalf, again, I think while it's more interesting to sit and meet this kid and engage with them if it's on a soccer field or at church, the legislative piece is a big lift that this child cannot do by his or herself. So again, I think encouraging our legislators do right by these children. They are children. They have a legal right to be here, and we have a moral obligation to do our best to take care of them. And we can. We do this well.
Well, anything else you want to make sure to hit, or any shameless plugs to leave us with today?
Yes, I do. One really interesting, and it's a state thing. And I lost my note here. There is a House bill by Representative Bernal, House Bill 195, that has to do with putting regulations around migrant farm workers' shelters. So it's one of the Texas scandals, the conditions that our migrant workers live in. It's not been regulated. People have gotten away with just shameful practices because they can. So anybody that's got a House member that would listen to them, get them to support that. There's a hearing this Wednesday between the House Urban Affairs Committee if people are interested in following that.
And before we let you go, we did have a question come in. Shouldn't we be asking for more staff to process the children and help them get to their destinations?
That is absolutely right. That's continuing to encourage, to pressure our responsible federal agencies to staff up on health and human service type folks. That's a change from the past. Before, no one was allowed into those processing centers except Border Patrol. So they're opening up. That encourages advocates because there's eyes on the kids besides law enforcement. The Border Patrol all along has said, we're not trained to do this. This is not our job. And advocates agree it's not. This is a job for social workers, for case managers. And this is nothing new. We've done this in the past quite successfully. So thanks for the question. That's absolutely on cue.
Right. So, Mike, really do appreciate your time and work. I did get a question about what House bill that was, House Bill 195. And Mike, if you have resources to share on that, please feel free to share that in the chat, and we'll make sure that we get it out in the comments at Facebook and other places. So any closing thoughts before I let you go?
No, thank you. Happy Holy Week to everyone, and great opportunity to show hospitality. That's always a grace.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for the work you're doing every day. I feel like I've seen you on Zoom several times over the course of the last year, but I'll certainly look forward to seeing you in person one of these days. So
that'd be great. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks again, Mike. All right. Next up, we'll welcome to the conversation Josh Houston, who definitely had a busy week last week. Josh, I've also seen you on Zoom like hundreds of times over the course of the last year, but this was the first time I've seen you on my television watching you testify in the Capitol. So it was good to see you there. Let's start out. Last week was definitely busy. You previewed it last Monday, but how'd the week go?
Hey, it was what we thought. Last week was controversial bill week in a number of committees. We had bills that were addressing voting rights, which we're going to talk more about here in a second. We had gun bills, the unlicensed carry of firearms, where anybody could carry it and they wouldn't have to go through a background check with the state. Police reform, George Floyd Act bill, the George Floyd Act in particular, but also a couple of other bills that are related to that are under the banner of police reform. In fact, that was going on at the same time in the committee with the gun people. It was a really interesting juxtaposition. We have a lot of bills on the electric grid. Some of those are getting started, some of the preliminary work that they plan to do after the power outages. We had healthcare bills, and then we had the transphobic bathroom bill 2.0, if you will. Transphobic bills related to high school sports were heard, kind of on a surprise, if you will, which we'll talk more about how that surprise came to be, but got scheduled late in the middle of last week and was heard on Friday. So these hearings went late into the night, as you would expect. The week ahead looks a little tamer. Some less controversial bills in committees, but if the past modus operandi of the Senate is any indication of how this week will go. Most of those controversial bills passed out of committee that very night, Friday night, and will be locked and loaded, if you will, and ready to go this week at some point. They'll probably have big floor fights coming up on the Senate side.
Right. So bringing us into this next week, we want to walk us through the action alert. We're, for I think, a third week in a row looking at voter suppression being the headline of that action alert.
Yeah. I want to spend some time on these because the national narrative around this, well, this is a big national fight. This is not unique to Texas. Georgia's making headlines, and I know the phrase Jim Crow 2.0 is out there. I don't think that's inaccurate by any means. I think it is lasering in on a thing that is absolutely true. But I think it also misses the totality of what is going on with these voting rights bills. And I think it would be easy for predominantly white churches to miss that these bills will affect you, which, you know, if you just care about this because of the goodness of your heart and equal protection, good. But if you care about this because it affects you, it needs to be both. And it is critical, I think, to make sure that you know, calling your representative is critical. But even more critical is making sure that people get the gravity of this situation and the types of proposals that they're coming with. And so in our action alert, we have an exceptionally long description of Senate Bill 7, because we need you to go through that list of the 16 ways it could affect you, because odds are it probably affects you and it affects your voting rights. I heard a state senator say, and this was shocking to me, because, well, we may just have to give up a little bit of convenience for security. And that's such a remarkably privileged statement, as if it's not just inconvenient to stand in line for 4 hours. It actually disenfranchises a lot of people to have 4-hour lines because people with jobs and people with kids can't do that. They can't stand in line for 4 hours. That's disenfranchisement, nor should they have to. So let's walk through this, Scott. I really want to go through the 16 ways that this could affect you. And this is just the 16 we've identified. There are probably more. So one, right off the bat, counties would be prohibited from providing to a nonprofit or a third party, so this includes churches, applications for a ballot by mail. We had churches do this. University Presbyterian Church did this, where they got applications and tried to get everybody in their congregation who is 65 and over and therefore are automatically eligible to get them to vote by mail. Did it with about 200 people because they wanted to get people out of the line on election day, so the lines wouldn't be long, especially with COVID being such a thing. The way this bill is written, it would prohibit counties from being able to work with them. So you'd have to call as your private self and say, I want one, and then go print it out. But if you say in any way you're doing this on behalf of a church, they would suddenly be prohibited from doing it. It's really bizarre. Number two, if a voter applied but never received a mail-in ballot, and this happened to several of you because you called and told me. So if you just never received your mail-in ballot for whatever reason, this bill would make you vote provisionally, which diminishes the likelihood that your vote would ultimately count. So right now, if your ballot never arrives, you swear a sworn affidavit where they can come after you for perjury. If you're lying and vote twice, the effect of it is to then cancel out the mail-in ballot so that if it arrives, it's rejected automatically and your actual vote is what's counted. This would make you vote provisionally and therefore increase the likelihood that your vote won't count. Three, you'd be required, if you were disabled, to produce a doctor's note. So you're putting a doctor in a weird position of having to practice law without a license. So that's interesting. And to then be able to tell if you're disabled or not, and your condition meets the facts of your condition meet the letter of the law. That's not a doctor's job. Second of all, you'd have to get one. Which really is none of government's business and may be violating of HIPAA, which is a federal law about privacy. On top of that, fifth, the doctor's note would presumably be a public record, which could then be used by employers or insurance companies to discriminate against you. And it's just going to make things a whole lot harder if you even have access to a doctor. It's like a poll tax in a sense, was what it's beginning to look like one, and we're going to end up probably talking about the legal definition of a poll tax if this bill passes as in its current form. So we're going to skip to 6 now, because that was several objections I wrapped into one with that provision. Signature verification committees with mail-in ballots would be able to use, quote, any known signature to reject your mail-in ballot. Currently, it's like dated back for the last 6 years, which is more reasonable because your signature evolves as you age. So if you or one of your family members is elderly, like my 98-year-old grandfather, whose signature has evolved on my birthday cards year after year after year after year, they'd be able to go back and look at a 25-year-old driver's license signature and say, oh, that doesn't match, and reject your mail-in ballot. That's absurd. 7, they have formulas in this bill that would have the effect of limiting voting machines in minority and low-income urban areas. The formulas are arcane. We won't go into it. We don't need to. We know what they do. In urban, low-income, and minority areas, you're going to have fewer voting machines and fewer voting machines at the voting locations, which is going to have the effect of having even longer lines in low-income neighborhoods. And we already know that people of color have to wait in line on average much longer. There's numerous studies that show that people of color wait in line much longer on election day already, and this would just make that problem even worse. 8, election judges. Many of you have served as election judges. We have recruited and encouraged you to serve as election judges. This bill would make you, and I guess in this case me, because I've been an election judge, subject to criminal penalties, and not just criminal penalties, but then civil lawsuits where they could sue you personally if you remove a disruptive, and I want to stress, partisan poll watchers. The poll watchers are appointed by candidates. They are not only partisan, they are biased for one candidate. If they got disruptive and you removed them, you would be subject to criminal penalties and you'd be subject to civil lawsuits. 9, the partisan poll watchers would then be allowed under this bill to engage in disputes with the election judge. And think about this. If you're arguing, there's 4 people, on average, is the election judge, the alternate judge, and 2 clerks. And they administer the whole polling location. If you have an election judge sidelined arguing with the poll watcher for 15 minutes, that's going to cause that line to back up. And if that line backs up, you have people who are disenfranchised. So that's at best. At worst, these partisan poll watchers would be able to record practically anything they wanted with their cell phone device. Currently, cell phone devices and recording devices are prohibited in polling locations. This would allow the partisan poll watcher to carry these things in and record practically anything they wanted, including your sensitive personal information that you're handing the election judge to get you, ready to go to vote. On top of that, you have partisan poll watchers who'd be they're authorized to record anything in your car if you are voting curbside. If you're disabled and eligible to vote curbside, they can then run over there with the election judge and their camera and record everything going on in your car. And in theory, the bill says that they can't record what's actually on your ballot, but there's absolutely no penalty if they screw up and record the thing going on your ballot by, I didn't mean to. Okay, well, there's no penalty for messing up and actually recording and violating the secrecy of your ballot. 13, the partisan poll watchers would be free to edit any video. So these videos they take on their phones, there's no penalty. There's no prohibition on them editing it in very misleading ways. And we know people do this. They do it all the time. We know Project Veritas does it. We had a group called the Phoenix Foundation run around the Texas Capitol a few years back and record lobbyists and lawmakers and edit the video in all sorts of misleading ways. Yeah, they'd be empowered to do this under this bill. 14, the Secretary of State would be giving broad new powers to fine and local election officials if the local election officials don't purge the rolls as the Secretary of State orders them to. This includes good faith disputes. And we actually had one of these good faith disputes back in 2019, just 2 years ago, where the Secretary of State got bad data from the Department of Public Safety and then sent a letter to several of the large counties saying you need to remove these people from your rolls because they're not citizens. Well, they were absolutely citizens. And the local counties pushed back and said, no, these people are citizens. They've been naturalized since the Department of Public Safety put that list together. And they went to court and they fought about it. And the local counties were correct. The Secretary of State botched it hard. This is established fact. Under this bill, the Secretary of State would be able to fine these counties on every day they didn't purge these people from the rolls. Even in these good faith disputes where the counties are saying, no, you're incorrect about this. 15, voting in a temporary structure, a parking lot, a parking garage, or a motor vehicle other than curbside would be prohibited, even in the event of a disaster. So this is clearly aimed at how Harris County and Travis County and a lot of the big counties were able to adapt to the COVID-19 pandemic, which were perfectly appropriate and secure ways to do an election. They would want to make you go inside a building is the language in this bill. 16, this bill would create new causes of action where disgruntled candidates who lost could then go to court and allege fraud in a way that they aren't currently able to do under current law because they can still go to court and allege fraud. This would create even new ways to do these it would create frivolous lawsuits. Let's just put it at that. It would create frivolous lawsuits that are otherwise, adjudicated and rejected because they're frivolous. Which you can just think about the last election cycle we went through. It's just more ways to create this narrative that an election's been stolen when it absolutely hasn't. It's just perpetuating the big lie. So for these 16 reasons, your voting rights are absolutely affected by this bill. And if you were not appalled yet, then I don't know what to do for you. These bills are quite broad, quite sweeping, and they're hard to pin down because it's death by 1,000 cuts, is what they're trying to do to our election system with these bills. They're terrible ideas.
And so this ended up passing in the Senate committee late Friday night. And so the time to call your state senator is like today, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's absolutely today. We expect, and again, this is all perfectly fine, but the way the Senate rules work, the lieutenant governor is the office empowered over the calendar of the Senate. That's what makes it the most powerful office in the state, frankly. And it's always been that way. But for that reason, you don't always know exactly when the Senate is going to do a thing. It's a very mysterious chamber. That's just part of the way we've always done it. But that means the rumors do come out, and it is expected to be on the floor Wednesday. I'm hedging because you have to with the Senate, but we expect this bill on the floor on Wednesday is what the current rumor is. So sometime this week is highly likely.
So, in some instances in the past, we've had you call committee offices or members of committees or committee chairs. This is call your state senator because it's coming to the floor potentially soon.
That's correct.
All right. So we did get a question in the chat about House Bill 6, which was on the list last week, and I see it's on the list again this week. You want to walk us through that?
Yeah, I want to walk through what happened a little bit too, because I think we need to explain what happened to know why it's back on the list. So it wasn't all bad last week. And what I mean by that is any delay you get in a 140-day legislative session when you're trying to defeat a measure is any day you buy is a good day. And so both of these bills did not go off quite as expected. On Monday, and I should back up, the Senate State Affairs Committee has been doing this thing where they'll post notice of the hearing. So they're going to tell you what bills are up on Friday at 3, late in the afternoon. And they're telling you late in the afternoon on Friday what they're going to be doing at 9 a.m. on Monday. which is within the rules. It's 48 hours notice, but there's also rules that say senators can buy more time if they want it. It's called the tag rule. It's super arcane, but it's 72 hours if senators get together and say, hey, I want to slow that bill up. And so a group of senators on the five Democratic senators said, hey, wait a minute, slow this bill up. And so instead they tagged it, and they tagged it that morning. So it kind of took everybody by surprise. And that's, I don't know, Saturday or Sunday when they would have had an opportunity to otherwise. Nobody was in town. But they tagged it on Monday morning, and that delayed it. And it delayed it, and that's why we had that hearing on Senate Bill 7 on Friday instead of on Monday. It's also why we had the Star Spangled Banner and the Bathroom Bill 2.0 added to the agenda on Friday when it wasn't previously on the agenda for that Monday. So you can read into motive as you will for why that was done, but that's why we got surprised by the transphobic women's sports bill. That's really kind of the new bathroom bill for this session. Over in the House side, you had a similar series. You had a series of snafus. They were kind of dissimilar, but over on the House side, House Bill 6, which is not a true companion. It's just a similar bill with similar ideas, but they're not exactly the same. You had it scheduled for Thursday, and that hearing began. And so a couple of things you need to know that's arcane and procedural, but super important to the events. It is common practice for the chair of the committee to hand over the duties of being the chair to the vice chair when the bill being heard is the chairperson's bill. That's common. Also very common is to allow a legislator who really cares about a bill but is not on the committee to kind of make a guest appearance on that committee. They don't get to vote, but they do get to ask questions of the bill author. That's just a courtesy that's very common. It's not required, but it is a very common courtesy that's standard practice in committees. So knowing those two things, you had the chair of the committee, who is the author of House Bill 6, hand the gavel to the vice chair, who is, the chair is Representative Kane, Briscoe Kane. The vice chair is Representative Jessica Gonzalez. And then the interested legislator is Representative Nicole Collier, who was representing, in this case, the Black Caucus. So big fact to know, in neither the Senate State Affairs Committee, or in the House Elections Committee, so the two committees with jurisdiction, both of those committees lack any African American on the committee, on the two committees that do voting rights, which is, it's just a factual thing to say. It's an omission. So that's the stage. And what happened is that the vice chair was running the meeting. This is Representative Jessica Gonzalez. And she was going to recognize Representative Collier from the Black Caucus, not on the committee, but interested party, to ask questions of the bill author, Chairman Kane. And the chair decided that he did not want to take questions from Representative Collier, and a dispute ensued. And it really wasn't a blindsiding. If you were watching the House floor, there was a parliamentary inquiry about this situation. So it was clear that there had been disagreement before they ever got to committee. The parliamentarian and I presume the Speaker's office or whoever was in the chair on the dais on the House floor, I did not actually see it myself, kind of punted and said, y'all work this out amongst yourselves. It's just a theoretical question that hasn't happened yet. So as they tried to work it out amongst themselves in a 4-minute video that you can find online on our, I don't know where we have it, but we have it on a 4-minute video. This plays out where the chair, Briscoe Kane, basically reasserts himself saying, well, I'm taking the gavel back. and I'm not going to allow you to recognize Representative Collier to ask me questions. And as this drama was unfolding on camera, you had a, kind of a, hey, let's take this to lunch kind of suggestion. And so when Chair Kane, having reasserted himself in the chair, said, okay, let's take it to lunch, and recessed. But he forgot to recess to a time certain, which is a arcane procedural rule, but a necessary one that could have brought down the entire bill. Therefore, the chair had to come back about 15 minutes later after being informed of this fact by the parliamentarian and say, we have to cancel today's hearing. We're going to reschedule. And so they rescheduled the bill for this week, a week later. So it bought us a week. And that is the short version of that story. So yes, we are back up to having House Bill 6 in committee again this week. House Bill 6 does not have all of those provisions that I rattled off in Senate Bill 7 yet. I say yet because I have seen a committee substitute to House Bill 6. It is beginning to take on provisions that look like many of the provisions in Senate Bill 7. It would not surprise me one bit to see a new committee substitute on Thursday with even more of those provisions from 7 in the bill. But let's talk about what's in there currently that we know to be in there currently. The provisions on I'm blanking, the one that prohibits churches or really any nonprofit from a third party from being able to work, the prohibition on counties distributing applications for ballot by mail are in there. So the way this reads is that any public funds can't be used to help out a third party distribute ballots by mail, applications for ballots by mail, which is objectionable. But then the really big objectionable one is the poll watcher provisions. Many of these poll watcher provisions that empower the poll watcher to be disruptive, disempower the election judge to maintain order, and then punish the election judges for maintaining order and efficiency in the polling location. Many of those intimidation provisions are in House Bill 6 and just really a non-starter because anybody who knows anything about American history will know historically how poll watchers have been used to intimidate people of a certain color in the past.
So do you want to say anything about the George Floyd Act hearing last week other than?
Well, yeah, I'd love to. I know we have good video of Dr. Freddie Haynes from Friendship West Baptist Church came down and from what I have been told, really rocked it, did an awesome job testifying. I'm sure we have video of that wherever it is we're housing Legislative TV. Do you know, Scott? I'm sorry, I keep saying it that way.
So if you go to Texas Impact's YouTube channel, we have all of the video from last week. If you click on videos, you can scroll through.
You're gonna make a shameless plug to subscribe because something magical happens at 1,000 subscriptions that I don't understand.
We're going to get to 1,000 YouTube subscribers and we're at like 995. So if there are 5 of you out there who haven't subscribed yet, apparently we get a pizza party when we get to 1,000. So
there's something kind of important about that. I can't remember what the policy of YouTube is, but
yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
So I will say a lot of really great testimony last week, including many representatives and senators who gave public testimony on that bill that I found to be really heartwarming and worth a watch. So
that went well, and you should absolutely call that committee. It's in the action alert. Call House Homeland Security. Let's get that bill moving. Let's just get that bill out of committee and in the calendars and moving along the process. It needs to pass.
So moving on to some other bills coming up this week. I see you have a couple related to renewable energy this week.
Yeah, so we had this one on the agenda last week. It just got delayed for reasons that I'm not sure. But Senate Bill 398 by Senator Menendez is a solar bill of rights to install solar panels on your house so that no one can interfere with that. Local governments and HOAs and stuff like that will try to regulate you for reasons that are not nearly as important as climate change. And then we have a couple bad bills, unfortunately. They are arcane, but the thing to know about them is that they increase the cost and therefore are aimed at kind of penalizing renewable power. So that's Senate Bill 1278 and 1282 if you're looking at the action alert this week. And all those bills are in Senate Business and Commerce at the same time on tomorrow.
All right, and then a list of other bills that are having hearings this week. You want to walk us through it? There are 4 of them.
Yeah, back to George Floyd for a little bit because that trial is starting. Nationally, that's making news, and here at the state level, we have several other bills that are not called the George Floyd Act, but are clearly related to the summer we've been through. 2 of them are ending no-knock warrants, and if you don't, most of you probably know what that is, but if you don't know what that is, police officers will get a warrant and they don't have to knock and announce who they are. And this is what happened to Breonna Taylor, where you don't know who's entering your home. It's in the middle of the night. And it feels like a home invasion. And in a state like Texas, where we so value the castle doctrine and we're all armed, it is a terrible idea to not be saying you're the police. The police like the element of surprise. I get it. But again, people don't know it's the police. And if it were me, I would think that my home was being invaded and then the rights to self-defense kick in. It's a terrible idea not to have any announcements that you're police. If you're worried about somebody running, surround the house. I mean, there's just not, no-knock warrants were a thing that were litigated all the way up to the Supreme Court. I guess about 15 years ago. It was in the 2000s, if I recall. I remember studying it in law school. They were somehow deemed constitutional, but they are, okay, fine, but that doesn't mean we have to do it. It's a policy decision, and we can absolutely say, no, we're not doing this. It's a terrible policy decision. It's dangerous for law enforcement. It's dangerous for people in the home, especially if you have the wrong address. I mean, in this case of Breonna Taylor, they didn't even have the right address. These are 2 good bills that need to pass. A third one that's related to law enforcement is strengthening and building upon the body camera legislation from a couple sessions ago. It's House Bill 929 by Representative Carl Sherman. It is in the House Homeland Security Committee, the same committee that George Floyd stuff went through last week. So while you're calling about pass the George Floyd Act, go ahead and mention House Bill 929. It's a good bill. We need better policy on body cameras. Often, you will take incrementalism in the Texas legislature, where you'll pass a bill and you need to come back a session later and do more work on the policy to get it a little better and a little better and a little better. And this is one of those things where we got body cameras through and now we need to build on that policy and do it some more. And then finally, the last bill, House Bill 1038. So Lawrence v. Texas is an old case. And it's already law in Texas that you can't criminalize homosexual relationships. That's well established by the Supreme Court. But we still have it on the books because Texas. And it's time to take that off the books. It's an unconstitutional statute that is not enforceable. And it's just time to just repeal that statute. And so that's what that bill would do.
All right, anything else you want to hit for us this week before we close out?
No, I mean, just, we're at kind of a fascinating moment. It's not even the right word, but we're in a moment in American history that we're going to read more about. Our kids will read more about. And it feels like it's going to be a decade-long struggle, if not more. It's critical that the white church respond. I know we have many different color people who are part of our network, but I really want to talk to my white friends a little bit and just say, this is a moment for you. We've got to step up. And I think the number one thing is voting rights, because while the George Floyd stuff is super important, a lot of it is local policy. And the only way you change local policy is at the ballot box. And if a bunch of people have been disenfranchised, It's not just law enforcement, it's healthcare, and disparities in healthcare, and disparities exist throughout every policy area. And the right preservative of all of the rights is the right to vote. So really, we got to put a line in the sand and make our stand on this issue. I would say, one shameless plug: send me your stories. Read through this action alert. Think about what you went through to vote in 2020. And if any of these things affect you, we want to know about it. We will absolutely read through it. We may then ask you if you'd be willing to do an affidavit, which is pretty easy. You just need a notary. That enables me to go to the legislature and say, here is evidence of how these would affect our membership, Texas Impact's membership. We would have standing for you as a member to then do that and go into the committee and create a legislative record. That legislative record, should we lose on these bills, that legislative record would then go and show intent in court. And who knows, maybe you end up being the named plaintiff in a lawsuit. Wouldn't that be fun? Whatever your last name is versus Texas. Who knows where it'll lead. But for the right now, send me your stories. I'll read through them. And I'm not promising, lawsuits. But without your stories, none of that's possible. So we need to know how these bills affect you personally. We need your personal stories, and we'll use them.
Josh, do you ever feel like if you sued the state of Texas as an individual, it would be confusing if it were Houston v. Texas?
Well, when the city of Houston does that, it happens all the time, but I guess it's city of Houston as opposed to an individual.
I'm saying maybe it'd be confusing if you did it as an individual.
Well, I mean, statistically speaking, in criminal cases, I'm sure there's somebody out there. There's a state of Texas versus Houston that's out there probably. So.
All right. Why don't you research that this week? I know you don't have anything else going on.
Well, every traffic ticket I've gotten has been that. So, there's definitely one.
All right, friends. Well, Josh, thank you so much for the time today. I know you've got a lot going on this week. So thanks for starting your week with us. And friends, he does start his week for us because you are incredibly important. We hope that you'll make the telephone calls this week. We hope that you'll sign the sign-on letters that we discussed at the beginning. You can find those at texasimpact.org. in the Action Center, where you can also soon find the action alert. But share the content, share this podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and invite your friends to do the same, because we need a movement of Texans of faith working together to address these very important issues over the course of the coming weeks. And so let's get on it this week. We would encourage you to join the rapid response team. If you get to do that, join the legislative engagement group to be connected with other people in your district. You can find both of those at texasimpact.org. in the Action Center. And if you ever have questions about any of that, you can reach out to me at scott@texasimpact.org. And remember, if you appreciate the work of Texas Impact and the Weekly Witness community, please make sure that you and your congregations are members by going to texasimpact.org/join. Friends, we are in the busy part of the legislative session. It's time to get to work and find some friends to join you. Share the action alert, share the Weekly Witness episode. Now is the time for congregations to be active and engaged. So let's get to work.